Hello again, youngins. Ranger Bill here. So I've made it to Old Donation Parish or Old Donation Episcopal Church. It's located over off of Independence Boulevard in the Witch Duck area. And witch duck is an important term in this particular story we're about to read. I'm going to read I was going to do it at a cool little statue over here, but it's too close to the highway. Independence Boulevard makes too much noise, so I found a quiet place back here with the church where I can read peacefully to y'all. So, the Witch of Pungo, for which the book is named, is an interesting story. It's based on historical truth of actual events and people, and it can kind of teach you a lesson about talking about your neighbors and getting up in other people's business can lead to some dire consequences. As you read the story and you see the historical background behind it, I think you'll come to realize that people made a bit of a mistake along the way, but maybe we've learned from it. So anyway, the Witch of Pungo. The sun shone very hot on Wednesday morning, July 10th, 1706. There was great excitement at the courthouse on the Lynnhaven River. Grace Sherwood, the Witch of Pungo, was going to be ducked, or tried by water, to prove whether or not she was a witch. All the roads leading to the courthouse were filled with wagons, carriages, carts, and people on horseback. The river was full of boats that had come from great plantations. The ferry that crossed the river brought load after load of people. Some had come from Pungo and Kempsville and Newtown and Great Neck and Little Neck, and even from as far away as Norfolk and Portsmouth and the capital at Williamsburg. Never before had a person been tried by water in Virginia, and the shores of the western branch of the Lynnhaven River were alive with spectators. At nearby Pembroke, the Saunders children sat on top of the brick entrance gates, watching all of that was passing in front of their home. John, who was 8, and little Mary, who was 6 years old, were waiting for the carriage that was to take them to their cousin's home on the river, where they would be able to see when they put the Witch of Pungo into the water. For weeks, people had talked of nothing else. Grace Sherwood had finally given her consent to be tried by water. This meant that she would be tied in a queer position called crossbound. The thumb of her right hand would be tied to the big toe of her left foot, and the thumb of her left hand would be tied to the big toe of her right foot. She would then be thrown from the boat into the water over her head in depth. If she sank and drowned, she would be proved not a witch. A lot of good it would do her. When she was dead, if she could keep herself afloat by swimming, it would mean she was a witch, and they could then put her in jail. Once before, Mary and John had watched the people gather at duck Grace Sherwood. A week before, as the time came for the ducking in the river, a terrible storm had come up. Trees had been blown down, and the rain had mired the roads until the carts got stuck, and lightning had struck a big oak tree and split it in half and killed 2 cows standing under the tree. The people knew that the witch from Pungo had caused the storm to come, so she would not be ducked. The house at Pembroke had been full of people who had come in and out of the storm and to dry their clothes. Mary and John listened as the people told stories about all the things that Grace, the Witch of Pungo, had done. One woman said that Grace Sherwood had come through the keyhole into her bedroom and changed herself into a black cat and ridden her. Another, a man, said that she often made herself small and sailed to England in an eggshell and brought back magic seeds and herb cuttings to grow in her garden. All of the herb rosemary growing in Virginia Beach is supposed to have come from a single piece brought from England by Grace Sherwood. Someone else told how Grace Sherwood had danced around the cows in the pasture and made them give sour milk. The story that John Sanders liked best was about Grace asking the sheriff if he would like to see something he had never seen before and which she would never see again. She then sent a boy to a tavern to fetch 2 pewter plates that had never been washed. The boy didn't follow her instructions and dipped the plates into a rain barrel, but dried them carefully and took them back to the jail. Grace took the pewter plates, banged them over the boy's head, and told him to get two more and not to dip them in the rain barrel. When she received the new plates, she asked to be let out of jail. Then, clapping the plates under each arm, she flew up into the air over the jail. There was another story about a picnic at Currituck Sound. One of Grace Sherwood's neighbors asked if she was going. Grace replied, "Want to go with me in my eggshell?" "Not on your life," said the neighbor. Off the neighbor went to the picnic with her friends, and when they reached the beach at Currituck Sound, there was an eggshell tied to a tree near the shore, and there was Grace Sherwood up in the tree laughing at them and eating her lunch. John and Mary told these stories to each other as they waited for the carriage and fetched the people coming toward the courthouse. At last, the carriage with their mother and stepfather, Maximilian Bush, aboard stopped at the gate and picked up the children. Mr. Bush knew much about Grace Sherwood, for he was one of the lawyers who had taken part in the trial as Queen's attorney. Excitement ran high as the carriage rumbled past the courthouse and the church into the woods at the point of the land where the other cousins in the Bush and Thurgood families were waiting. John jumped out of the carriage and ran with the boys to climb into a big live oak tree that hung over the river. Mary sat with her mother and other women and children among the ferns and wildflowers on a cool green bank surrounded by moss. She held tight to her mother's hand, for she was frightened by the yelling of so many people. All at once, the moment for which everyone waited came. Out of the jail across the cove came two men who carried the witch of Pungo tied up in a blanket. Another man carried a Bible because she floated on the water. They planned to tie the Bible, if she floated on the water, they planned to tie the Bible around her neck and make her sink. The crowd became quiet as the men, their prisoner, started from the shore. The sheriff rowed out to the center of the cove. The crowd began to yell, "Duck the witch of Pungo! Duck the witch of Pungo!" Dogs began to bark, and small boys in the trees along the river shore took up the chant. Grace was then lifted from the blanket and thrown overboard, cross-tied. There was a big splash. Grace Sherwood bobbed up and floated to the surface of the water as she pushed the ropes from her hands and feet. The men then pulled her toward the boat and tied the Bible around her neck. She again went beneath the water, but not for long. She freed herself from the Bible and floated about in the cove, singing one of her bewitching songs and laughing at the people. From the shore, the chant of "Duck the Witch of Pungo" continued. The commotion and noise frightened little Mary Saunders, and she buried her face in her mother's lap and began to cry. Mrs. Bush gathered her daughter up and hastened back to the carriage and sent the driver to fetch son John. He did not want to leave, for he, from his place up in the tree, could see all that happened, and he enjoyed the excitement and was yelling very loud himself. As he dragged himself away, he had a final view of the men in the boat pulling Grace Sherwood out of the water. Mary and John Saunders never forgot the day they saw the ducking of the witch of Pungo. After Mary grew up and married, she would return to Pembroke in the summer with her little boys to visit her brother John and his family. On rainy days, the children gathered about and begged to be told stories about Grace Sherwood. A generation later, when Jonathan Saunders built the big brick house which still stands at Pembroke, his children begged for the same stories about Grace Sherwood, the witch of Pungo. And that's her being dubbed. Now, the rest of the story, the historical background. More than 200 years ago, before there was a place called Virginia Beach, this area was known as Princess Anne County. Some of the people who lived here believed in witches. They thought women that sold their souls to the devil were witches, and in return they received magical powers from the evil spirit. Today there are no witches in the area. Only in the imagination do they return to ride their brooms and keep their black cats company on Halloween. But in some parts of the world, there are people who practice witchcraft. Ignorant people buy their medicine made of herbs to cure a particular sickness. They also pay witches to cast evil spells on enemies, just as the people who lived in the American colonies did in the 18th century. A person then could be called a witch and tried in court. Often, innocent people had this happen to them. Such simple things as dancing in the moonlight or being deformed or making medicine from herbs caused people to be looked upon with suspicion. If her neighbors did not like her, they could say a woman was a witch. But if a person was tried in court for witchcraft and proved innocent, she could sue the person who had called her the witch. In Princess Anne Courthouse in the city of Virginia Beach, there is an old book containing records of several trials of people accused of being witches. The most important trial was that of Grace Sherwood, known as the Witch of Pungo. This trial lasted 5 years, and in the end, Grace Sherwood was tried by the water to see if she was a witch. She was ducked in the Lynnhaven River near a place to this day called Witch Duck Point. If a witch was ducked and drowned, she was innocent. If she untied herself and was able to swim, she was called a witch. History tells us that Grace Sherwood was able to swim, so she was a witch and put into jail at the old courthouse that was located near Old Donation Church. Here she stayed in prison for 9 years. By that time, the excitement about witches had passed, and she was set free and returned to her home near Pungo to live with her husband and 3 sons. Grace Sherwood, we are told, was a beautiful woman, not like the ugly witches we see in pictures. She still did things that made her neighbors wonder. She dressed like a man. It is said that grass would never grow where she danced in the moonlight. The neighbors believed she could grow any flower. At Blossom Hill near Pungo, there is a wild blue lupine that is known to this day as the witch's flower because legend says Grace Sherwood planted it. The memory of Grace Sherwood has been passed by stories from generation to generation and become the folklore of the Virginia Beach area. The end. All right, y'all. So that's the Witch of Pungo and my reference for growing up. I hope you've enjoyed the readings. I've certainly enjoyed sharing them with you and traveling down memory lane as we have in these places. I hope you've enjoyed them. I hope somewhere along the way you'll get a chance to get out and see some of these places, understand both the historical context as well as the stories that go with it. And I hope you'll use this opportunity to keep growing, to keep learning, and keep developing yourself. All right? Stay safe, stay productive. Remember, I love you. Peace.